The last review on the Airbnb page was dated 3 weeks ago, just 1 star. The guest, someone named Bethany K., had written only this: "The elk aren't elk." I'd laughed when I first read it, scrolling through my phone at 2 a.m., bourbon warming my chest as I searched for the cheapest mountain getaway I could find. The cabin near Nederland, Colorado, 30 miles into the Rockies from Boulder, was priced at $40 a night, in peak season. The other reviews were equally bizarre. Thomas W. from Denver. Beautiful views, but I couldn't stop counting the windows. There were always more than before. Another from Priya S. Host was accommodating. Followed all instructions. Still lost my wedding ring to the basement. It wasn't stolen. It was traded. Meth heads, I'd figured. Mountain people gone weird from altitude and isolation. I clicked book now without hesitation. 3 months earlier, I'd been Edward Wolowitz, senior data analyst at a tech startup in Austin, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned and my spine curved into a question mark. My manager, Derek, had this way of standing behind my desk, breathing his coffee in Altoid's breath while asking about quarterly projections. The break room conversations revolved around IPOS and stock options. My apartment overlooked the highway. Even at night, the city hummed with the anxiety of people trying to make it. My therapist, doctor. Navarro, not one of those app-based ones, but an actual person with diplomas on her wall, had suggested I needed what she called aggressive decompression. Those were her exact words. She'd written them on a prescription pad as a joke, but I'd kept it tucked in my wallet. RX. Mountains, silence, and absolutely no Excel spreadsheets. I'd grown up in Texas hill country, but mountains were different. Mountains were where people went to find themselves or lose themselves, depending on what they needed. John Denver had sung about Rocky Mountain highs. Hunter S. Thompson had blown his brains out in Woody Creek. The Rockies didn't care either way. The Airbnb listing showed a modest A-frame cabin tucked between lodgepole pines, maybe 1,200 square feet. Wood-paneled exterior gone gray with weather. The photos were oddly sparse. Just 4 images, all exterior shots. No cozy living room with a stone fireplace. No rustic kitchen with copper pots. The host, listed only as M, had written a brief description. Historic cabin. Original 1973 construction. Mountain views. All amenities provided. Please note, the house rules upon arrival. Nederland was perfect. Close enough to Boulder for a grocery run. Far enough that nobody would bother me. Population 1,500. The kind of place with 1 coffee shop, 1 bar, and a residence who'd chosen elevation over convenience. I needed that. A week of nothing but mountain air and silence. Christ, I should have paid attention to those reviews. The drive up Canyon Boulevard from Boulder turned my rental Corolla's engine into a whining protest. October in the Rockies meant autumn gold on the aspens, tourists gone home, and that particular quality of sunlight that made everything look like a Coors commercial. I passed the Carousel of Happiness in Nederland, a legitimate carousel in a wooden building, because mountain towns collect eccentricities like lint and turned onto County Road 126. The GPS lost signal 2 miles up. The directions I'd screenshot said to look for a rusted yellow snowplow, make a left at the boulder that looked like a sleeping bear, then follow the dirt road until it ended. Mountain directions. Everything was landmarks and faith. The cabin squatted between the pines exactly as advertised, though the photos hadn't captured how the structure seemed to lean slightly forward, like it was listening for something. A wooden sign hung from the porch. Elk Ridge Established, 1973. Someone had carved additional words below in different, newer script. Mind the hours. The lockbox code worked, 2847, same as the elevation marker I'd passed. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly clean. Not mountain clean, where dust and pine needles were considered decorative elements, but actually clean. The floors gleamed. The windows, I counted 6, no 7, wait, 6, were spotless. The furniture was all from the 70s, orange cushions, wood paneling, a kitchen with harvest gold appliances that probably cost more than modern ones to collectors. On the kitchen table, held down by a chunk of quartz, was a laminated sheet of paper. House rules for Elk Ridge guests. Welcome. This cabin has been a sanctuary since 1973. To ensure your stay remains pleasant, please observe the following. 1. The elk gather at dawn and dusk near the salt lick behind the cabin. Do not photograph them. Do not count them. If you must observe, watch only their shadows. 2. The basement door locks from the outside at 11:47 p.m. each night. It unlocks at 4:33 a.m. These times adjust for daylight savings. Do not attempt to open it during locked hours, even if you hear knocking. 3. Cell service is unreliable. The landline in the kitchen works, but only for outgoing calls. If it rings, let it go to the answering machine. The machine is in the closet. Do not retrieve it. 4. The neighbor, Mrs. Valdez, may leave baked goods on the porch. They're safe to eat before sunset. After sunset, bury them at least 50 feet from the cabin. 5. There are no mice in the walls. The scratching you hear between 2 and 3 a.m. is the house settling. Do not investigate. Do not leave food out to help them. 6. If you find items that don't belong to you, watches, rings, small personal effects, place them in the wooden box beside the fireplace. They will be gone by morning. I read it twice, then poured myself 3 fingers of Stranahan's whiskey from the bottle I brought. Mountain people. I'd once stayed at a place in Taos where the owner insisted guests had to sage cleanse the doorways every evening. This was probably the same thing, local color for city folk who wanted authentic experiences. The cabin was actually nice once I settled in. The wood stove cranked out heat. The tap water was cold and tasted like minerals and snow. From the kitchen window, I could see all the way to the Continental Divide, peaks already white with early snow. My phone had 1 bar if I stood on the porch's northeast corner. Enough to text my sister Nina that I'd arrived safely. Not enough for Derek to send me spreadsheets. I unpacked my clothes into the dresser that smelled like cedar and something else. Something like copper pennies. The bedroom had a quilt that looked handmade, little triangular pieces forming a pattern that hurt to follow with your eyes. Not quite a spiral, not quite random. I folded it and put it in the closet. By evening, I'd eaten a can of chili, read 50 pages of a paperback thriller, and almost forgotten about the rules. The whiskey helped. The silence helped more. No traffic. No neighbors arguing through thin walls. Just wind in the pines and the occasional crack of branches adjusting to temperature changes. At 9 p.m., I looked out the back window for the elk. The salt lick was there. A white block on a post, glowing slightly in the moonlight. There were no elk, but their shadows moved between the trees anyway. Hi everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. I woke at 3:17 a.m. to scratching on the walls. Not mice, the rules had said. The house settling. but houses didn't settle in rhythmic patterns. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause, like Morse code from inside the timber. I lay in the dark, counting seconds between sequences. 23. Always 23. The sound moved, started near the headboard, traveled along the wall toward the kitchen. I followed it, bare feet on cold floors, until it stopped at the basement door. The door that wouldn't unlock until 4:33 a.m. The brass doorknob was original to the house, one of those ornate ones with a keyhole you could see through. I knelt down, knowing I shouldn't, and peered in. Darkness, but darkness that moved, shifting like oil on water. The scratching resumed, now clearly coming from below, and with it, a smell seeped through the keyhole. Sweet rot, like fruit left too long in the sun. I backed away, grabbed my whiskey from the counter, and sat at the kitchen table until gray light finally pushed through the windows. By 6 a.m., I'd convinced myself it was probably raccoons. Mountain cabins attracted them. They were clever, could sound almost human when they wanted. I made instant coffee, the fancy Starbucks Viot packets I'd brought because I wasn't a complete barbarian, and stepped onto the porch. Mrs. Valdez was already there. She stood at the edge of my driveway, maybe 60 years old, wearing a flannel jacket and jeans that had seen actual work. Her hair was gray-black, pulled into a braid. She held a foil-covered plate. "Morning," she called out, voice carrying that western slope accent where vowels got stretched like taffy. "You're the new guest." Not a question. I walked down to meet her, noted how she stayed precisely at the property line, toes against an invisible boundary. "Edward," I said, accepting the plate. Through the foil, warmth and the smell of cinnamon. "Thanks for this. Sopapillas, my grandmother's recipe." She studied my face like she was memorizing it. "You read the rules?" "Yeah, interesting. Traditions." Her laugh was dry as sandpaper. "That what you think they are?" She glanced at the cabin, then back to me. "My family's been in these mountains since before Colorado was a state. That cabin." She stopped, seemed to reconsider. The original owner, Mitchell Hensley, was a geology professor at CU Boulder. Built it as a research station. You know what he was researching? Rocks. Magnetic anomalies. This whole ridge sits on a convergence of unusual mineral deposits, magnetite, quartz with strange inclusions. He thought it affected local wildlife behavior, migration patterns, breeding cycles. She pulled her jacket tighter. He disappeared in winter of '91. They found him 3 miles up the mountain, frozen solid, standing upright like he'd been walking somewhere specific. His eyes were gone. "Animal predation," I said automatically. "Sure, except the birds don't come to this ridge. Haven't you noticed? No magpies, no jays, even the ravens avoid it." She turned to leave, then paused. "Eat the sopapillas before noon. And Edward, that wooden box by the fireplace. Check it every morning. Sometimes things appear that need returning." She walked back through the pines toward a cabin I couldn't quite see through the trees. I stood there holding warm pastries, wondering if everyone in Metterland was touched, or if altitude psychosis was contagious. The sopapillas were incredible, light, fluffy, drizzled with honey that tasted of wildflowers. I ate 3, then remembered the rule about sunset and felt ridiculous. It was 9 a.m. The sun was bright. The world was rational. I decided to hike. There was a trail behind the cabin that switched backed up toward treeline. I needed to move, to shake off the night's weirdness with sweat and endorphins. The trail was well maintained, probably by Forest Service volunteers. I passed an abandoned mining claim, just a hole in the mountainside blocked with rusted bars. The rocks around it glittered with mica, and my phone compass app spun wildly when I held it near them. 2 hours up, I reached a meadow where the trees thinned. The view was spectacular. Waves of mountains extending to the horizon, snow-capped peaks like teeth against the sky. I sat on a boulder to drink water and eat a Cliff Bar. That's when I saw the elk. 7 of them, cows and juveniles, grazing in the meadow's far corner. Beautiful animals, their tame bodies contrast against the dying grass. I pulled out my phone for a photo before remembering the rule. Don't photograph them. But these were actual elk, not sharrows, flesh and bone and slowly chewing grass. I aimed my phone camera. Through the screen, they looked wrong. Their legs bent in too many places. Their faces were stretched, like someone had pulled the skin too tight across skulls that weren't quite the right shape. One turned toward me, and in the camera view, its eyes were human, brown irises, white sclera, looking directly at me with intelligence that made my stomach clench. I lowered the phone. They were just elk again. Normal, natural, peacefully grazing. I raised the phone. Wrong, wrong, wrong. My finger hovered over the capture button. One photo. Evidence that I wasn't losing it, but something genuinely twisted existed here. The elk thing with human eyes took a step toward me. The phone died. Full battery to black screen, instant and complete. When I tried to power it on, nothing. Not even the Apple logo. The elk vanished while I was looking at the phone. Not ran away, vanished. One moment there, next moment just empty meadow and wind-bent grass. I stood up fast enough to get head rush, stumbled, and my hand landed on something sharp in the grass. A wedding ring. Gold band, inscription inside, too worn to read. Priya S. had mentioned losing her wedding ring. This couldn't be it. She'd stayed at the cabin weeks ago, and this meadow was 2 hours uphill. But I put it in my pocket anyway. The hike down took forever. My phone stayed dead. The forest felt hostile now. Every shadow potentially hiding those things that wore elk shapes. When the cabin finally came into view, the sun was already touching the western peaks. On the porch sat another plate, more sopapillas. The note tucked beneath read, "Noticed you went hiking. These are for tomorrow's breakfast. Do not eat after sunset. Maria Valdez." I looked at my watch. 6:47 p.m. Official sunset was 6:32. The pastries smelled incredible. I carried the plate inside, set it on the counter, and stared at it while darkness pooled in the corners of the cabin. The sopapillas were still warm. How? Maria had left them while I was hiking. They should have been cold as the October air. The logical part of my brain, the part that analyzed data patterns for a living, said this was nonsense. Food didn't become dangerous because the sun went down. That was vampire logic, fairy tale thinking. But the ring in my pocket felt heavy as lead, and through the window, those shadowless elk movements continued between the trees. I opened the trash can to toss them, then stopped. The rules said to bury them 50 feet from the cabin. Specific, measured. What happened if you just threw them away? What happened if you ate them? At 7:15, I made a decision that would later seem insane. I took a single bite. The sopapilla tasted perfect for exactly 3 seconds. Sweet dough, cinnamon sugar, honey from flowers that grew nowhere near Colorado. Then the flavor changed. Not spoiled, altered. The honey tasted like copper and antiseptic. The dough turned fibrous in my mouth like chewing on hair. I spat it into the sink, ran the water, gargled with whiskey. My reflection in the kitchen window was wrong. Not dramatically, just a quarter-second delay between my movements and the reflection's response. I raised my hand. Reflection raised its hand a beat late. I turned away. The reflection took its time following. The landline rang. Sharp and mechanical, the bell actually made of metal hitting metal. The answering machine was in the closet. The rules said, "Don't answer. Let it ring." But the ringing continued. 5 times. 10. 15. Answering machines picked up after 4 rings. This wasn't connected to any machine. 20 rings. 25. I yanked the receiver off the cradle. Hello? Static. But underneath, barely audible, someone breathing. Wet, labored breathing, like lungs full of fluid. Mitchell Hensley built this place. The voice was old, masculine, educated. He understood about convergence points, where the mineral veins create frequencies. The elk were first. They heard it before anything else. Who is this? Check the box, Edward. Every morning. Some things need to go back. Some things need to stay. You'll learn the difference. You'll have to. The loun went dead. When I tried calling back using *69, the phone just rang into nothing. I looked at the wooden box beside the fireplace. Cedar, maybe a foot square. No decorations except for symbols carved into the lid that might have been Native American, or might have been something else. Inside, a tarnished silver bracelet, 3 brass buttons, a child's plastic toy, a soldier, arm raised in salute, and now Priya's wedding ring, which I'd added without really deciding to. At 10 p.m., I tried to sleep. The bedroom felt too exposed, too many windows showing nothing but black forest, so I dragged the mattress into the living room near the fire. The scratching in the walls had started early, 9:47 by my watch, moving in wider patterns now. Not just wall to wall, but ceiling to floor, diagonal paths that made no structural sense. At 11:43, I positioned myself by the basement door with my phone, still dead, flashlight, and the bottle of Stranahan's. I wanted to see it lock. Needed to see it. Because locked doors don't lock themselves, and if I could catch the mechanism, understand the trick, everything else would fall into place. 11:46. The doorknob was still brass, still cold, still turned freely. 11:47. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was organic, like cartilage popping, tendons stretching. The doorknob didn't just lock, it fused. The brass seemed to melt and reform, keyholes sealing like a wound healing in fast forward. I touched it, and the metal was body temperature warm. From below, knocking, rhythmic, patient, scratch, scratch, pause, knock, 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 scratch, scratch, pause, knock, knock, knock. I drank straight from the bottle and waited. The knocking continued, sometimes moving to different parts of the basement, as if whatever was down there was walking the perimeter, testing the walls. At one point, I heard what sounded like my name, not spoken but tapped out in those knocks. The syllables of Edward Wallowitz turned percussion. At 2 a.m., the scratching in the walls reached crescendo. Not mice, never mice, but something with intelligence, mapping the bones of the house. I turned on every light, but electricity couldn't push back the wrongness. In full brightness, I could see my breath, though the thermometer read 68 degrees. The wooden box by the fireplace was rattling. Not violently, just a persistent tremor like something inside wanted attention. I approached slowly, whiskey brave and exhausted. The lid was warm. The symbols carved into it seemed deeper than before, creating shadows that moved independent of the light source. Inside, the wedding ring was gone. In its place, a brass compass that spun without stopping, a leather wallet, men's, worn with no ID but $17 in bills from 1988, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses with one lens cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Mitchell Hensley had worn wire-rimmed glasses. I'd seen them in the single newspaper photo Maria Valdez had shown me on her phone before it, too, had died. I closed the box, sat on the couch, and watched the basement door. The knocking had stopped, but something was breathing down there. Deep, patient breathing that fogged the crack under the door, even though the basement should have been colder than the main floor. At 4:33 a.m. exactly, the door unlocked with that same organic sound. Healing in reverse, brass wound on ceiling. The knob turned freely again. I didn't open it, wouldn't open it. But through the keyhole, that oil-slick darkness had changed. Now, it had depth, distance, like looking through a window into a vast space that couldn't possibly exist under a 1,200-square-foot cabin. Something moved in that darkness, large, angular in ways that hurt to process. It paused at the keyhole, and I jerked back, certain it had seen me. A smell leaked through, ozone and copper and something medicinal. Dawn came slowly, the sky going from black to purple to gray. No sunrise, just gradual illumination revealing low clouds pressed against the mountains. When I finally looked outside, Mrs. Valdez was standing at the property line again. This time, she wasn't holding pastries. She was holding a shovel. She pointed to a spot exactly 50 feet from the cabin's corner. I could tell she'd measured, where the earth was already disturbed. Several small mounds, each about the size of a dinner plate, dotted the area. She met my eyes through the window, nodded once, and walked back into the trees. The sopapillas were still on the counter. In daylight, they looked perfectly normal. Golden brown, sugar-dusted, inviting. My stomach cramped, remembering that single bite, that moment when sweetness turned to something else. I carried the plate outside, found the shovel Maria had left, and dug. The other mounds were recent, days or weeks old. I didn't dig them up, didn't want to know what previous guests had buried. My hole went down about a foot before I hit rock. I placed the plate in, still covered in foil, and filled in the dirt. When I turned back to the cabin, someone was watching from my bedroom window. It was my reflection from last night, still catching up, still delayed. It waved at me with my own hand, smiled with my own mouth, then walked backward out of view. By noon, I'd packed my bags 3 times. Each time, something prevented leaving. First, the rental Corolla wouldn't start. Battery fine, gas tank full, just a click when I turned the key. Second attempt, the dirt road out had changed. Not blocked, but wrong, curving in directions that led back to the cabin no matter which way I drove. The third time, I made it to the yellow snowplow, but Nederland was gone. Just forest where the town should be, pines growing through spaces where the Carousel of Happiness and Pioneer Inn had stood for decades. I returned to the cabin and unpacked. My phone remained dead, a black mirror reflecting nothing. The landline only produced dial tone when I tried calling out, but no number connected. Not 911, not my sister, not even time and temperature. The rules hadn't mentioned this. They hadn't mentioned a lot of things. At 2 p.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, measured steps that circled the cabin counterclockwise. Through the window, nothing. But the steps continued, wood creaking under invisible weight. They stopped at the front door. 3 knocks. Not the desperate pounding of someone in distress. Just 3 polite raps like a neighbor borrowing sugar. I looked through the peephole. Mrs. Valdez stood there, except her face was 17 years younger, her hair black instead of gray. She wore the same flannel jacket. "Edward?" I brought dinner for later. Her voice was wrong. Not older or younger, but doubled, like two people speaking in almost sync. Elk stew. My grandmother's recipe. "Maria?" I opened the door a crack. She looked exactly like the woman I'd met that morning, except for the age regression. "You look different." She tilted her head, confused. "We haven't met yet. I'm Maria Valdez, from down the ridge. The rental agency asked me to check on guests, make sure they understand the rules." She held out a ceramic pot, the kind grandmothers in New Mexico used for pozole. "This needs to simmer until evening. Whatever you do, don't let it boil." I took the pot. It was heavy, warm, smelled of juniper and meat. "We met this morning. You gave me sopapillas." Her expression flickered. Young face, old face, young again, like a TV losing signal. "The morning hasn't happened yet. Not up here. Time moves different above 9,000 feet. Mitchell knew that. It's why he built here, at the convergence." She turned and walked into the trees. I watched until she vanished, then looked down at the pot. The lid was sealed with wax, but through the ceramic I could feel something moving inside. Not sloshing like liquid, crawling. I set it on the stove over the lowest flame. The afternoon stretched like pulled glass. I tried reading, but the words rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. Tried writing in my journal, but my handwriting came out in languages I didn't recognize. The only constant was the wooden box, which had filled again while I wasn't watching. A Swiss Army knife with all the blades rusted open. A bundle of photographs, all landscapes, all showing the cabin from angles that didn't exist. And a medical alert bracelet engraved Mitchell Hensley, temporal lobe epilepsy. At 5 p.m., the elk arrived at the Salt Lick. Real ones this time, or at least consistent ones. They looked the same whether I watched directly or through glass. 7 cows, 3 calves, and a bull with antlers that caught the light wrong, like they were made of something denser than bone. They moved in patterns around the salt, never random, always returning to specific positions like actors hitting marks. I counted them without meaning to. 14. But when I counted again, 17. Then 9. The number changed each time, though the elk themselves never seemed to arrive or leave. The rule said not to count them. Now I understood why. Each count changed them, or changed me, or changed the relationship between observer and observed. By the 7th count, the bull's antlers had too many points, spreading like fractals into impossible geometries. By the 10th count, one of the calves had human hands instead of hooves. I stopped counting and watched only their shadows, as the rule suggested. The shadows were stable, normal, reassuring. They moved like real animals, grazed like real animals, even when the bodies casting them were doing something else entirely. The shadows were what the elk were supposed to be. The bodies were what they'd become, listening to whatever frequency sang through the magnetite veins. The pot on the stove began to bubble. Not boil, Maria had warned against that, but a slow, rhythmic blooping like a mud pot at Yellowstone. The smell had changed from juniper and meat to something chemical, like hot plastic and tar. I turned the flame lower, but the bubbling increased. Steam leaked from under the wax seal, and in that steam, I saw shapes, faces. Mitchell Hensley's wire-rimmed glasses materialized for a second before dispersing. The landline rang. This time I didn't answer, but after 30 rings, the receiver lifted itself off the cradle. The voice that came through the speaker was mine, but older, exhausted. Day 4, you'll understand. Day 5, you'll accept. Day 6, you'll choose. Day 7 doesn't exist up here. It's what Mitchell learned too late. The week loops at 6 days, but only for the cabin. Metterland thinks it's been a single night. Your job thinks you've been gone an hour. This is insane. I said it out loud, to myself, to the voice, to the empty cabin. Check your watch. My watch read October 15th, 3:47 p.m., but I'd arrived on October 15th. This morning had been October 16th, hadn't it? The basement door opens at 4:33. My voice continued through the phone. Don't go down tonight. Tomorrow night, you will. Night after that, you'll want to. Night after that, you'll need to. That's when you call yourself and leave this message. The line went dead. The receiver remained floating 3 inches from the cradle for another minute before settling back into place. Outside, dusk was falling. The elk had gone, but their shadows remained, frozen on the ground like nuclear ghosts at Hiroshima. The pot had stopped bubbling. When I lifted the lid, the wax seal had vanished. Steam rose, carrying the scent of perfectly normal stew. Chunks of meat, potatoes, carrots, all in rich brown gravy. I ladled some into a bowl. It tasted like home cooking, like something Nina would make for Sunday dinner. Comfort food. I ate the entire bowl before wondering where Maria had gotten fresh elk meat when hunting season hadn't opened yet. In my stomach, something moved. Not pain, not nausea, just movement. Like the meat was remembering how to walk. I rushed to the bathroom, but nothing came up. In the mirror, my reflection was finally synchronized again, but my eyes were wrong. The pupils had gone vertical, like a goat's. No, like an elk's. The pupils went back to normal after an hour, but my vision had changed. I could see heat signatures now. The walls pulsing with warmth where the scratching traveled, handprints glowing on doorknobs I hadn't touched in days. Days. Hours. The watch was useless. Every time I looked, it showed a different date in October, sometimes jumping to November, once showing February 30th, a date that didn't exist. I found Mitchell Hensley's journal in the wooden box at 9 p.m., letter-bound, water-damaged, pages filled with increasingly frantic handwriting. The early entries were scientific October 3rd, 1991. Magnetic readings off the charts near the basement foundation. The bedrock here contains magnetite concentrations, unlike anything in the geological surveys. Arranged in patterns. Not crystalline formation, but something else. Intentional? October 7th, 1991. The elk behaved differently here. They returned to exact positions, like iron filings around a magnet. When I photographed them through polarized lenses, their bone structure shows anomalies. Evolution in real time, or something else wearing their shapes. October 12th, 1991. Lost a day. Woke up thinking it was Sunday when it was Tuesday. Maria Valdez, neighbor, claims she saw me working in the basement all Monday, but I have no memory. The basement door was locked from the inside. The entries degraded from there. Words became symbols, diagrams of impossible angles, mathematical equations that use numbers that didn't exist. The last legible entry, day 3. The basement isn't below, it's beside. Folded space. Mitchell number 3 went down last night. Mitchell number 7 came up. We're all here now, all the versions that got caught in the loop. The elk were first. They've been here since the Laramie orogeny lifted these mountains, wearing bodies like coats. I understand now. The convergence isn't just magnetic. It's temporal. It's dimensional. It's... The rest was just spirals drawn in what looked like dried blood. At 11:47, I watched the basement door seal itself again. This time, I saw more. The brass didn't just fuse, but grew like living tissue, spreading faint veins across the wood. The house was alive, or something wearing the house's shape was alive. The scratching in the walls wasn't creatures moving through them, but the walls themselves, flexing, breathing, adjusting. The knocking from below was different tonight. It came in patterns that matched my heartbeat, then diverged, trying to pull my rhythm into sync with it. I found myself breathing in time with the knocks, had to consciously force myself to break the pattern. At midnight, someone stood in the backyard. Not an elk, not Maria, me. Another version, older, wearing clothes I didn't own yet. A heavy Carhartt jacket, boots caked with mud that glowed faintly in the moonlight. He was digging near the salt lick with his bare hands, pulling something from the earth. When he turned, his face was mine, but wrong. Features slightly shifted, like looking at yourself in a spoon. His eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just pools of nothing. He held up what he dug up. A cell phone. My cell phone, the one in my pocket, except this one was crushed, aged, covered in roots that had grown through the circuitry. He pointed at the cabin, then at his wrist where a watch showed 4:33, then walked backward into the trees, each step reversing perfectly like footage played in reverse. I checked my pocket. My phone was gone. The wooden box rattled. Inside, my phone, working again. Battery at 100%, showing 17 missed calls from Nina. But when I tried to call back, the number connected to someone else. A man speaking Portuguese who insisted I'd called him every night for 6 years, asking about the elk procedure. At 2 a.m., the scratching in the walls formed words. Not English, not any language that used human vocal cords. But I understood them anyway, the meaning pressing directly into my brain. The convergence requires an anchor. Mitchell was first. You are current. Another comes after. The cycle maintains the fold. I grabbed Mitchell's journal again, flipped to the diagrams. One showed the cabin from above, but with additional rooms that didn't exist, or didn't exist in this version of the cabin. Basement rooms extending impossibly far, connecting to other basements of other cabins, a whole network of folded space beneath the ridge. In the center of the diagram, Mitchell had written, "We're not guests. We're the processing system." The landline rang. This time when I answered, it was Nina's voice, but speaking words she'd never say. "The company knows where you are, Edward. They've always known. Why do you think Derek recommended this specific cabin? The data you analyze isn't market trends, it's convergence patterns. Every spreadsheet you've processed for 3 years has been mapping this place, predicting when someone like you would be needed." "Nina?" My voice cracked like I was 16 again. "I'm not Nina. I'm what Nina becomes in the timeline where you don't go to the basement, but you will. Tomorrow night at 4:33, you'll go down, and you'll meet Mitchell. All the Mitchells. And you'll understand that the elk were just the beginning. The real transformation happens below." The line went dead. When I tried calling Nina's actual number, it rang once before converting to static that formed patterns. Long, short, short, long, short, short, long. Morse code spelling out, below, below, below. I went to the kitchen for water and found the refrigerator full of food I hadn't bought. Elk steaks, labeled with dates. October 15th, 2019. October 15th, 2003. October 15th, 1991. Each package contained meat from a different timeline's version of the same animal, or what had once been an animal. The windows were fogging from the inside, and in the condensation, messages appeared. Not written, formed by the absence of fog, like someone breathing on the glass from the other side. Day 5, you understand. Day 6, you choose. Day 7, you become. But hadn't the voice on the phone said Day 7 didn't exist? At 4 a.m., I prepared to watch the basement door unlock, set up a chair directly in front of it, whiskey for courage, Mitchell's journal for guidance. The brass doorknob began its reverse fusion at 4:32, those organic sounds of unsealing. At 4:33 exactly, it clicked open. Not just unlocked, open. The door swung inward, revealing wooden steps descending into darkness that moved like water. But the darkness had layers, depths, showing glimpses of other places, other basements, other versions of this same moment happening simultaneously. At the bottom of the stairs, barely visible, stood a figure in wire-rimmed glasses. "Come down, Edward." Mitchell Hensley's voice was exactly as I'd imagined from his journal. Educated, tired, resigned. "You're early in your cycle, but time moves differently down here. We can have years of conversation in the minutes before dawn. You need to understand what you've become part of." I stood at the threshold. One step forward would take me into whatever space existed beneath, beside, or within the cabin. The air from below smelled of copper and ozone, and something organic, like the inside of an animal. "The elk," Mitchell continued, "were the indigenous inhabitants. Not the bodies you see. Those are just vessels. The real elk exist in the convergence, in the folded space where time runs in all directions. We're joining them, Edward. Everyone who stays here long enough joins them. That's what the cabin is for. It's a processing center, preparing human consciousness for the fold." My foot moved toward the first step without my permission. My reflection in the dark, the delayed one, the one that had waved from the window, was already at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. "The company knows," Mitchell said. "Your company. They've been feeding data into the convergence through you for years. Every spreadsheet, every analysis was really mapping the magnetic anomalies, predicting when the fold would need new anchors. You're not a guest, Edward. You're an employee. You've always been an employee. This is your real job." I pulled back, slammed the door, heard it lock with that organic seal. But I could still hear Mitchell talking, his voice coming through the walls now. "Tomorrow night, you'll come down." They all do. I did. All 7 versions of me did. The Edward before you did. The one after you will. It's not a choice. It's what we're for. Dawn came without sunrise, just gray light filtering through clouds that had never moved, would never move, because weather didn't exist here. Just the appearance of weather, the memory of weather, recycled and reused for each new guest who thought they were escaping to the mountains for a week of peace. I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My pupils were horizontal now, like prey animals have, like things that are hunted. The 6th day arrived without me sleeping. Or maybe I'd slept for days. The watch showed October 9th, then October 21st, then March 45th, a date that shouldn't exist in any calendar. Time had become negotiable, like everything else at Elk Ridge. I tried to leave again at dawn. This time, I didn't take the car. I walked, followed the trail I'd hiked days ago, or years ago, or yesterday. The abandoned mining claim was different now, the rusted bars gone, the entrance clear. Inside, modern equipment hummed, servers, monitoring devices, cables running deeper into the mountain. A placard by the entrance read, "Anthropic Convergence Research, established." 1973, partnership with HC Industries. HC Industries. My parent company, 3 levels up from the startup that employed me, the ones who'd bought us last year in an acquisition that made no sense, a data analytics startup purchased by a mining conglomerate. The equipment inside the mine showed my spreadsheets. Every Excel file I'd created in 3 years displayed on monitors, but the data was different. Where I'd input sales figures, the screen showed magnetic field fluctuations. Where I'd tracked customer engagement, they displayed something called dimensional membrane stability. My work hadn't been analyzing markets. It had been monitoring this place, feeding the convergence information about the outside world while it fed back. What? Maria Valdez was waiting when I returned to the cabin. Not young Maria or old Maria, but all of them. 7 versions standing in a line, each slightly different in age, in clothes, in the amount of gray in their hair. They spoke in unison, their voices creating harmonics that hurt my teeth. The basement door opens in 12 hours. You need to eat first, build strength. The transformation requires calories. The eldest, Mariah, stepped forward, handed me another pot. Not elk this time. Beef. Normal beef from a normal cow that lived and died in linear time. The last real meal you'll have. I'm not going down there. All 7 Marias laughed, but not cruelly, with pity. Mitchell said the same thing. Every Edward says the same thing. But the convergence doesn't ask, Mr. Wolowitz. It processes. You were selected years ago when your psychological profile matched the requirements. Analytical mind, pattern recognition, social isolation, temporal flexibility in your hippocampus. Temporal flexibility? Some humans can perceive multiple time streams without going insane. About 1 in 30,000. Mitchell was one. You're one. The company tests for it during hiring. Hidden in those personality assessments, the logic puzzles, the coding challenges. You're probably scored in the 99th percentile. I'd been proud of it. The Marias began walking backward, each taking a different path into the forest, dispersing like light through a prism. The youngest called back, "The beef will taste like beef." Nothing else. A kindness. Eat it. Inside the cabin, the walls were breathing visibly now, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched neither my heartbeat nor my breathing, but something in between. The scratching had stopped because there was nothing left to scratch. The walls were the creature, or the creature had become the walls. I heated the beef stew. It did taste normal. Gloriously, mundanely normal. Beef and potatoes and onions, salt and pepper, maybe some thyme. I ate until my stomach hurt, trying to anchor myself in this simple, human act. But even while eating, I could feel the change accelerating. My vision kept shifting between spectrums, normal light, then heat, then something else that showed the magnetic fields as flowing ribbons of color. The wooden box was overflowing now. Objects from dozens of timelines. Wallets, glasses, rings, keys. All from different versions of guests who'd stayed here. I found my own driver's license, but the photo was 20 years older. The expiration date in 1997. I found Mitchell's death certificate, dated 6 different years, each listing a different cause. Exposure, animal attack, cerebral hemorrhage, temporal displacement syndrome, suicide, voluntary dimensional translation. At noon, another Edward arrived at the cabin. Younger, maybe by 5 years, driving the same rental Corolla, carrying the same duffel bag. He walked up the porch steps, used the same code on the lockbox, entered with the same exhausted slouch I'd had a week ago, or yesterday, or 10 years from now. I tried to warn him. Stood right in front of him, shouted, waved my arms. He walked through me like I was mist, He was in a different layer of the loop, still in his first day, still thinking this was just a cheap mountain getaway. He'd find the rules, laugh at them, pour himself whiskey, the cycle beginning again. The phone rang. This time it was Derek's voice. "Wallowitz, the board is very pleased with your integration metrics. The convergence accepts your data signature. Your consciousness is synchronizing with the fold at an optimal rate. We'll be promoting you to permanent assignment." "Derek? You knew this whole time?" "There is no Derek, Edward. There never was. I'm a construct, a personality matrix designed to guide selected individuals to the convergence points. There are 17 cabins like this one, scattered across zones of magnetic anomaly. The Rocky Mountains, the Himalayas, certain valleys in Norway. Each one processes compatible consciousnesses, preparing them for integration with the indigenous entities. The elk. The bodies you call elk are just the three-dimensional protrusions of something much larger. Imagine an iceberg, but instead of water, it's reality itself. What you see as an elk is just the tip breaking through into your perceptual framework. The rest exists in folded space, in dimensions your physics hasn't discovered yet. What happens when I go to the basement? You join them. Become part of the processing system. Your consciousness expands beyond linear time, experiences all possible versions of yourself simultaneously. You become useful. You become necessary. You become eternal. The line didn't go dead. It transformed into a sound that wasn't quite static, more like wind through spaces that didn't exist, carrying voices of hundreds of Edwards, all speaking different words in different times, creating a chorus of myself that made my nose bleed. At 3 p.m., Mitchell Hensley knocked on the door. Not one Mitchell, dozens, all occupying the same space, but at different angles of time. Young Mitchell with dark hair and enthusiasm. Middle-aged Mitchell with his wire-rimmed glasses. Old Mitchell, who never got to be old in linear time but aged here in the fold. Mitchell with elk antlers growing from his skull. Mitchell made of living magnetite. Mitchell who was just an equation now, a formula for transformation that hurt to perceive. They spoke with one voice that came from everywhere. The basement isn't down, Edward. It's through the electromagnetic membrane that separates this reality from the others. The cabin is built on a wound in space-time, a place where the universe folded wrong during formation. The indigenous consciousness, what became the elk, has been here since the planet cooled. We're just the latest additions to its collection. I won't go. You're already there, have been for years. Every spreadsheet you created was you, reaching back from the basement, encoding messages and data. You've been preparing yourself for this moment since HC Industries hired you. Time isn't a line, Edward. It's a web, and you're already woven into it. The Mitchells dispersed like smoke, but one remained, the most human-looking one, though his eyes reflected too many colors. He sat on the porch step, patting the space beside him. I sat, because what else was there to do? The worst part, he said, voice almost normal, is that it's not horrible once you're there. It's beautiful, experiencing all times at once, seeing the patterns in everything, understanding how reality actually works rather than how we think it works. But that beauty is what makes it horrible, because once you see it, you can never unsee it. Never go back to being just human. Never exist in just one moment again. Why fight it then? Mitchell smiled, and for a moment his face was just a normal human face. Because the fighting is what keeps us human for these last few hours. The resistance is the only thing that's still ours. At 4 p.m., I sat by the basement door again, 23 minutes until it opened. Outside, the elk had gathered, hundreds of them now, more than the meadow could hold, existing in overlapped space. Their shadows covered the ground like spilled ink, but the shadows showed their true forms, vast, crystalline, geometric things that existed in 11 dimensions, using elk bodies like puppets, like fingernails, like the smallest possible expression of themselves in our thin slice of reality. The door would open at 4:33. I would go down, not because I chose to, but because I already had, would have, was having right now in all the other timelines where this moment existed. At 4:32, my hands were on the doorknob before I decided to touch it. The brass was blood-warm, pulsing like a small heart. The organic unsealing began, that wet sound of separation, like peeling apart two pieces of raw meat that had frozen together. 4:33. The door opened inward, and I stepped through. The stairs weren't going down. They went sideways, through space that folded like origami made of air and magnetite. Each step existed in multiple places simultaneously. I could feel my foot landing on wood, stone, metal, and something soft like flesh, all at once. The darkness wasn't absence of light, but presence of too many lights from too many times, canceling each other out into something my brain interpreted as black. At the bottom, or the end, or the center, was a room that couldn't fit under the cabin. Cathedral vast, with walls of living mineral that pulsed with electromagnetic current. The ceiling showed stars, but not our stars. Constellations from Earth's sky in different eras, all superimposed, creating patterns that made my eyes water blood. The other Edwards were there. Hundreds of us. Some looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same exhausted expression, separated by maybe minutes in a timeline. Others were older, younger, transformed. One Edward had skin like magnetite, dark and crystalline, reflecting rainbow patterns when he moved. Another was partially transparent, existing only when the light hit him at certain angles. An Edward near the wall had been here so long his feet had fused with the floor. Roots of copper and quartz growing through his legs, up his spine, blooming into something like branches from his skull. "Welcome to orientation," said an Edward wearing my father's face. No, wearing my face aged to look like my father would have looked if he'd lived past 52. The integration takes about 72 hours, or 3 seconds, or 11 years. Depends on your temporal reference point. Mitchell Hensley was there too. All of them, a crowd of one man scattered across decades. The youngest version, maybe 30, was taking notes in a journal that would become the water-damaged one I'd found upstairs. He looked at me with recognition that hadn't happened yet. "The process is easier if you don't resist," he said, "but nobody listens to that advice. I didn't. You won't. The Edward after you won't either." The center of the room held something that wasn't quite a machine, wasn't quite an organism. It looked like a heart made of crystallized mathematics, equations given form, beating with a rhythm that pulled at the iron in my blood. Each pulse sent waves through the electromagnetic spectrum, and with each wave, I could feel myself spreading, not physically, but temporally. I could sense the other moments of my existence. Being born an Austin Methodist, breaking my arm at age 7, my first kiss with Jennifer Chan in high school, signing the employment contract with HC Industries, dying, at ages 34, 51, 67, and 903. 903. I said it out loud. "Time gets complicated here," said an Edward made entirely of light, his voice coming from the fluorescent bulbs overhead. "You'll die at 34 in the timeline where you never came here, 51 in the one where you escaped after 3 days, 67 in the reality where the cabin burned down with you inside. 903 is how long your consciousness persists in the fold, measured in Earth Standard years. The elk entered through walls that became permeable when they approached. Not the puppet bodies from outside, but their true forms, structures of living mineral and electromagnetic force, beautiful and terrible, like naturally occurring nuclear reactors. They sang without voices, a harmony felt in bones and teeth, in the calcium of my skeleton resonating with their frequency. One approached me. Through its transparent crystalline form, I could see galaxies being born and dying in fast forward. It touched my forehead with something that wasn't quite a hand, and I understood. The convergence points weren't accidents. They were cultivated. Earth was a garden, and consciousness was the crop. Every species that developed self-awareness eventually found these places, these wounds in space-time, and contributed their unique perception to the fold. Dinosaurs had been here. I could feel the ghost of their reptilian thoughts in the walls. Early humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, all had added their flavors to the expanding collective. We weren't being invaded or consumed. We were joining something that had always been here, always been waiting. But why the rules? I asked the elk thing. Why the elaborate ritual with the cabin? It showed me, directly into my mind, the rules were training wheels, practice for thinking in non-linear ways. Each bizarre instruction taught our consciousness to accept impossibility, to function outside normal causality. The basement door that locked itself, the food that changed after sunset, the phone calls from other timelines, all lessons in letting go of linear thought. The company, I said, HC Industries, they're preparing people for this? An Edward in a business suit, eyes replaced with screams showing stock tickers, laughed. The company is this. Every corporation, government, system that seems to control human behavior. They're all expressions of the convergence, reaching up through the dimensional membrane, guiding compatible minds toward integration. Free will is real, but so is gravity, and we all fall toward the densest point eventually. I could feel it starting, the transformation. My thoughts were speeding up, splitting, experiencing multiple probability streams. I was in the basement, but also still upstairs, also in my Austin apartment, also being born, also dying. The vertical timeline I'd lived in was spreading horizontal, all moments accessible at once. My reflection, the delayed one that had been following me all week, finally caught up. It stood in front of me, perfectly synchronized now, and I realized it hadn't been delayed. It had been early, showing me what I was about to do, pulling me forward into this moment. Last chance, said Mitchell. All the Mitchells. Their voices created interference patterns that spelled words in the air. You can try to run. Some do. They make it as far as the doorway before the probability collapses and pulls them back. But the attempt is important. It's the last purely human thing you'll do. I ran. Not toward the stairs. Those had disappeared, folded back into wall, but toward what my new senses told me was the weakest point in the dimensional membrane. I pushed through electromagnetic resistance that felt like swimming through honey made of lightning. Behind me, hundreds of Edwards watched with expressions of sympathy, knowledge. Remembering their own attempts, the membrane tore. Just a little. Just enough. I could see through to the real world, the linear world, where the cabin sat normal and ordinary in the Colorado mountains, where tourists took photos and complained about Wi-Fi, where Nina was probably worried about her brother who'd gone on vacation and stopped responding to texts. But I could also see the truth, that world was just another layer of the fold. A consensus reality maintained by the convergence to keep harvesting consciousness. There was no escape because there was no outside. Every possible reality was already here, in the basement that existed beside everything. I stopped running, turned back to face the others. How long before I stop remembering I was human? You never forget, said the Edward made of roots and copper. That's the cruelest mercy. You remember being limited to one moment, one body, one thought at a time. You remember it the way you now remember being a child. Distant, innocent, impossible to return to. The crystalline heart at the room's center pulsed. My transformation accelerated. I could feel my consciousness spreading through the electromagnetic framework of the mountain, touching the thoughts of every guest who'd ever stayed here, would ever stay here. The rules made sense now, not as warnings, but as promises. This is what you'll become. This is what we all become. In the cabin above, a new Edward was reading the rules for the first time, laughing at their absurdity. I am writing this from everywhere and nowhere, from all times and no time. My fingers type on a keyboard in the cabin, while simultaneously scratching these words into Mitchell's journal in 1991, while also encoding them into spreadsheets at HC Industries in 2019. Linear narrative is a courtesy I maintain for your future guest who still thinks in straight lines. The Airbnb listing is still active, $40 a night, a price that never changes, no matter the inflation or season. The reviews accumulate like sediment, each one a fossil of someone's last human thoughts. Gerald T. Great views, but the windows kept showing different seasons. Amy L. Perfect isolation, but I lost my grandmother's necklace. Found my own baby teeth in the wooden box instead. Marcus P. Owner responsive to messages. Rules non-negotiable. Will not return. That last one was me, apparently. Written 3 years ago, though I've only been here 6 days. Or 70 years. Or since before the mountains rose. Nina thinks I'm dead. In her timeline, I am. Heart attack at my desk. Face in a spreadsheet. Derek finding my body still warm. The obituary ran in the Austin American Statesman. She keeps my ashes on her mantle next to our father's. But I also called her yesterday. Told her about the beautiful sunset over the Rockies. Promised to be home by Monday. She's simultaneously grieving and expecting me for dinner. Both realities are true. The convergence maintains all necessary timelines to keep the harvest running. New guests arrive daily. I watch them from the basement that exists in the corners of their vision, in the delay of their reflections, in the scratching they hear, but can't locate. Some last 3 days. Some make it to day 6. A few, like me, like Mitchell, complete the integration and join the eternal staff of Elk Ridge. We don't interfere. Much. Sometimes I move objects to the wooden box, little paradoxes to prime their consciousness for non-linear thinking. Sometimes Mitchell adjusts the rules, adding new ones as the convergence evolves its selection criteria. The elk observe everything, their true forms spiraling through dimensions, tasting each guest's potential for transformation. Mrs. Valdez still delivers food, though she's been dead since 1994. Also, she was born in 2003. Also, she hasn't been born yet. The sopapillas remain her grandmother's recipe, though her grandmother was an elk thing wearing human form, teaching mountain dwellers to prepare consciousness-altering foods that make the transition easier. The cabin expands. Not physically. It remains 1,200 square feet of A-frame normalcy to anyone who looks. But inside, for those who've been processed, it contains infinite rooms, each one a different probability, a different season, a different decade. I live in all of them simultaneously. My favorite is the version where the walls are transparent, showing the northern lights even though we're too far south. My least favorite is the one where the walls are made of the moments just before each guest's transformation. An endless loop of recognition and horror. Today, every day, no day, someone new will click Book Now on the listing. They'll see the reviews and laugh. They'll think they're too rational for mountain superstitions. They'll pack their whiskey and hiking boots and laptop for remote work. They'll drive up Canyon Boulevard, pass the Carousel of Happiness, turn at the yellow snowplow. They'll find the rules, read them, dismiss them. Then night will fall, and the scratching will begin, and they'll understand that $40 was never the price. The real cost is everything you were, transformed into everything you'll become. Welcome to Elk Ridge. Check-in is at 3 p.m. Check-out is never.